About a year ago, I was at a conference and I get a phone call from Matthew LaCroix. And he's all pumped up. He's excited. He's telling me he might have found the key to all civilizations on the entire planet. I started digging myself, and all of a sudden I said, wait a minute, there might be something here.
I could see that the symbology there was out of time.
I think to find, what you might call the source would be absolutely profound.
A lost Ararat civilization around Lake Vaughan is that missing link.
Hey everyone, I'm Billy Carson, aka Forbidden Knowledge, and I'm here to talk about the Lost Ararat Project, a brand new project where these amazing souls are here to help us discover untold truths and hidden truths about the world we live in today and how it's tied to the ancient past. I'm here with, of course, Matthew LaCroix, best-selling author. I'm here with Brien Foerster, the worldwide known researcher and archaeologist, and of course, Paul Anthony Wallis, another best-selling author. And today we're going to talk about this Ararat project and how you could also be involved with us and help us get to a point where we can release this to the world and help change our reality on this planet. Welcome, gentlemen, to this incredible podcast. It's an honor to be here with you all.
Thank you, Billy.
Oh, thank you. It's a pleasure.
Thank you, Billy.
You know, one of the things we were just talking about off air was the fact that about a year ago, I was at a conference and I get a phone call from Matthew LaCroix. And he's all pumped up. He's excited. He's telling me he might have found the key to all civilizations on the entire planet. I know Matthew, when he gets hyped, he gets excited. You know, you got to kind of pay attention because he doesn't really get excited like that often. I mean, he knows his stuff. He has his wheelhouse that he's in. But when he gets pumped like that, you got to kind of like, wait a minute, let me pay attention. And so I listened to him a little bit more. And then a few months later, a little bit more. And finally, I started digging myself. And all of a sudden I said, wait a minute, there might be something here. And Matthew just was so passionate about this. He really began to formulate and put this whole thing together to the point that we're sitting here right now about a year later talking about it, not only talking about it, but actually raising funds to produce an incredibly high quality produced documentary that's going to help change the world. Matthew, you want to talk a little bit, let the people know a little bit about what got you so excited and why we're on this journey right now.
Thank you, Billy. That was well said. In that time frame that you and I had that first conversation when I was in LA that time, and I called you and I was like, I said, I found this ancient site, Zernaki Tepe, and I said, it's got these strange polygonal walls and megalithic designs that look really similar to South America and has these mysterious origins, but I don't have any evidence to prove my theories of it connecting to an ancient Sumerian Noah connection because Mount Ararat was right there. But I had theories. And what was strange about that was instead of having something bend to that theory, I actually sort of forgot about it for a little while. I went off and I was doing other projects, and all of a sudden other things came into my life where I realized the scope of that discovery and how big it was. And it blossomed to potentially being what could be the first cross on Earth, the first chalice, the first iconography from the Tree of Life and the Sumerian depictions like we see with God Haldi and the lion, and all of these ancient triptych teachings we see around the world. It started to grow bigger and bigger. And before I knew it, a film was being talked about by a lot of people. And it was something that was brought up to me. And we thought, you know what? This is big enough and has enough evidence to truly change history. And I called Billy and I was like, Billy, I really want you to be a part of this, man. And we talked about it and we went over it. And he's like, you know what? I'm in. And then I called Brien and Paul and we got together and we said, if we want to do this right, we have to represent expertise from a wide variety of areas. If we're going to say something biblical about a first cross, we need Paul Wallis there. Extensive background in the church. If we want to talk about something megalithic and its precision, we need the world expert on megaliths, Brien Foerster. When we want to talk about ancient timelines and connections, we need Billy Carson there. What we need is to create a dream team to tell this message in the way that it needs to be told. And that's what we're trying to do right now, because we've already raised an enormous amount of money, but we're not done yet. So Billy, that's just a little bit of an understanding of this, but the project will be us going on the ground to make discoveries around Lake Van in Turkey, Ankara, Turkey, at a museum with an ancient relic hiding in the basement there, as well as flying across the world to Brian's wheelhouse area in Tiwanaku, Pumapunku in Bolivia, Lake Titicaca. And so this is going to be a film that goes all around the world to make discoveries and truly change history and connect people to a lost aspect and origin point that we forgot thousands of years ago.
Oh, it's going to be amazing. What I'd like to do is real quick, just kind of go around and have each one of us tell a little bit about some of our expertise and what our wheelhouse is and what we're passionate about. So, Brien, if you would like to start, for those who don't really know who you are or what you do, can you just give a quick summary?
Sure. I've been fascinated by ancient mysteries since I was a young boy, and so that led me to do a lot of traveling. I've been to about 100 countries, but I decided about 15 years ago to base myself in Peru because it is the most enigmatic little country in the world. The site we're going to be looking at in Bolivia is called Pumapunku and Tiwanaku. They're actually both the same location. It's just they have different fences around them. And no one honestly knows who built them. The standard story is that the Tiwanaku civilization constructed these locations between 100 AD and 1000 AD, but it's clearly impossible because they were constructed using very advanced machining technology, which to some degree we can't replicate today. That's basically my background, is a focus on megalithic sites, megalithic structures, lost ancient machining technology.
Beautiful, incredible. And Mr. Paul Anthony Wallis, amazing best-selling author of the Eden series. Can you talk a little bit about your passion, your history in the church, and how you got to the point you are now?
Sure. Well, I'll start off by saying that just like you, Billy, I remember the conversation I had with Matt when he introduced the concept of this movie to me. I was interviewing Matt for Fifth Kind TV, and as you say, Matthew is always enthusiastic for his work and his finds, but this really was off the chart. And for that interview, I really only had to ask about 4 questions, and we had 2 hours of material. And I could see that Matthew really did have something with these finds in what was ancient Armenia. And we looked together at the symbology on this ancient relic that he mentioned that's currently housed in Ankara. And that really grabbed me because I could see that the symbology there was out of time, out of place with all the timelines that we have for the history of humanity and the history of thought. And I was fascinated by the appearance of these ancient crosses, these ancient chalices, ancient griffins, and trees of life. And I thought, okay, Matthew's got something here. And then Matthew started talking about the dates, and I was thinking, oh, well, that could be right. I'm not sure. So I went back to my research, to my wheelhouse, which is ancestral narratives, the interpretation of ancient texts. And that's my background. My background, as you say, Billy, is in church ministry. I was for 33 years in church-based ministry, training pastors as a theological educator. And I trained them in hermeneutics, the principles of interpreting ancient texts and the history of Christian thought. I was a church doctor in that time and an archdeacon for the Anglican Church in Australia. So that's my background. And all that work, well, the church doctor forced me to engage with experiences that are very stretching, that take you into the paranormal and begin to stretch your worldview and your understanding of who and what we all are, but all the time engaging with ancient texts. When I went back to my ancient texts, just to go over in my mind what Matt had told me, I began to realize, oh my goodness, I think Matt is absolutely over the target here. Because I think what a lot of biblical scholars have missed, and many others have noticed, but have to mention softly, very gently, is that we may have geographically misplaced the origins of many of our ancient narratives in the Bible. Conventionally, we're looking in southern Mesopotamia. We're looking at the emergence of the Bible from out of annals of ancient Sumeria, Babylonia, Arcadia, and Assyria. And we miss the vital role that ancient Armenia played in the story of humanity. If we're going to take seriously the global recollection of a population reboot at some point, we have to go into Armenia. If we want to look at significant leaps forward in the human story, building with brick, iron technology, material science, we have to go to ancient Armenia. And when you start probing the root meanings of key words, you'll find geographically that will take you into the high country of Ararat. It will take you into ancient Armenia. And I believe that there are stories of human origins deeply embedded in the Bible, which have often been mistranslated, and that place us geographically exactly where Matt is taking us in this movie. So after I'd done a bit of homework, having interviewed Matt, I knew, oh my goodness, I've got to be involved with this, not only because it helps to rewrite where we think our ancient texts have come from, but because when we get into the symbology to be found on these ancient artifacts in these ancient sites, it takes us to a time that predates every religion on the planet, predates the Judeo-Christian tradition, predates every wisdom tradition, and takes us to the experience of our ancestors in the deep, deep past. And timelines is something I'm sure we're going to be discussing at length in this movie, to the root of where so many of these experiences and aspirations of mankind really come from.
Yeah, amazing. And
wow,
this is why you're on the team, because that extensive knowledge, that also that experience in the church, it's so important to have that level of balance, because you have to take that level of knowledge, which can be, in a lot of cases, it can go against the timeline, the new timeline we're trying to establish. But you're a person that's been there, done that, and have seen beyond and realized, wait a minute, something doesn't make any sense. So for us, it's really important to have someone like you on the team as well to help us to create the ability to have other people see with different eyes and actually understand, wait a minute, this man has done all of this stuff in the church for decades. Now, all of a sudden, he's helping to stretch this timeline. We got to pay attention here. So thank you. Yeah. And then, of course, we have Matthew LaCroix, who's coming on board, who's really the founder of this entire movement. And so, Matthew, after you, I'll tell a little bit more about myself. But what got you into the passion of ancient civilizations? Because when I first met you, you were an engineer that was already an expert on ancient text. I was like, this guy's an engineer, but he's doing ancient text. He should be doing this full time. He's too good. How did you find this path to where you are right now?
Well, first of all, thank you very much, Billy. And Paul, that was beautifully said. I could not have said it better myself. That's what we're trying to do. Everything he said. And I just want to mention, Paul actually came out to film when he did Open Minds at Gaia, and we got a chance to go hiking and spend the whole day together. And we talked all about the ancient symbols and our thoughts about it, and reflections on if there's any holes we could try to find or things we could try to figure out that we just didn't understand. And it was a profound conversation. And Paul and I really got to the heart, I feel like, of a lot of these mysteries and try to uncover them. But that's what it really is. Trying to understand a mystery. And I have to give a lot of credit to a man that's on this call right now for my journey. I mean, not only Billy Carson for coming and pulling me out of a more like unknown state, but in terms of someone to focus me on that path, to go down that road, Brien Foerster is undoubtedly one of the most important people in that for me. Because Brien, what he did is he would go to these sites. He would say, look, I'm not going to show you any fancy stuff with graphics or anything. I'm just going to point out to you with an expertise, showing you the angles to perfection of these blocks, and then showing you the contrast of the more primitive work above it. And I want to show you the difference and show you that narrative that they're both created by the same civilization does not hold up and does not make sense. And he, more than anyone else on this planet, has gone to more megalithic sites to document what is not aligning with history and what falls into this lost narrative than anyone else in the world. So I want to commend him for that mission. And so it's truly an honor to have him a part of this, to take his knowledge of Egypt and Peru and Bolivia and Mexico and other places around the world, take it, go to what might be the origin point and see if he can verify that for us. And Brien is very casual to say much, but I know that Brien is interested. He's very curious, and we're going to take him to these sites. And that's how we're truly going to change history, is by bringing experts like Paul and Billy and Brien and me to get there and actually be on the ground. And so that's really what started me, is this curiosity and wonder for this. And I think I just want to mention what Billy said is I think why I became connected with this discovery is because I was obsessed truly with the Sumerian, Akkadian, Babylonian, and Chaldean accounts of history. So I would read every single version of those cuneiform tablets. And of course, Sumerian is not the same language as Akkadian and Assyrian. They share a wedge-like design of their writing, but they don't share the same language. And so you're actually reading different language versions of those ancient stories. But most of those stories had an origin point of talking about either whether or not almost like our creation origin point, or an origin point talking about these events and when they first happened and what happened to us. And those stories go back to these ancient Sumerian kings. And the last Sumerian king, known as Utnapishtim or Ziusudra, who has very, very such strong correlations that any kind of biblical or ancient history expert agrees that it was derived, the Christian religious version of the Noah story and the flood was originally derived from the Sumerian version of the Atrahasis, and then later the Epic of Gilgamesh combination with what's also called the Legend of Itzubar. And those all contain nearly identical flood stories from an ancient Sumerian lineage, last king, who survived this catastrophe. And of course, Gilgamesh in that story goes and seeks out the Noah figure to try to learn the secrets of immortality. But remember, in the story, this last Sumerian king Noah figure with his family members, these bloodline descendants of him, instead of thinking of it like the Russell Crowe movie where he's like got like a primitive clothing on, we need to think of it more as looking at it as he was an ancient priest and a king. Okay, that's what the text described him as. An ancient priest and a king, just like Ashurbanipal was, who was trying to preserve and protect history and had an ancient lineage bloodline that was described as needing to be preserved. And this text described him as landing either on Mount Ararat or the mountains around Mount Ararat, which is what's so perplexing because they just disappeared from a lot of the history records. We had biblical accounts of what those lines might have been, but we didn't have any archaeological evidence to back any of it, or that it was from an older time period than we're told, like Paul says. And that was when these discoveries, looking at finding Kavis Tepe and Ionis Temple and Kef Temple and the underwater ruins under Lake Vaughn, that discovery became real because we had tangible evidence of those bloodlines written in basalt stone, cuneiform, in the stones, talking about the bloodlines, the ancient kings, the same depictions that with the winged gods like from Sumer, same depictions being lowered there. It all started to connect in a way where I realized this is huge. This is not something I can take on alone. And that's why I brought on these experts, these gentlemen, as well as an incredible director, 2 producers, one of them who's done high budget Hollywood films with like Robert De Niro and Bradley Cooper. We have incredible talent on this, and a team that is going to bring this story to life and embody it in humanity to try to teach us what we've truly lost. And that's what I believe the lost Ararat civilization, as I'm coining it, around Lake Vaughn, is that missing link.
Incredible, incredible. So well spoken, so well said. And of course, I'm Billy Carson. My biggest claim to fame is I've been able to make a lot of connections around the world, see beyond not only mainstream, but even deeply into a lot of the ancient texts and tablets, everything through from Sumeria, dealing with the Enuma Elish and the 7 tablets of creation, the Epic of Atrahasis, the Epic of Gilgamesh, the Code of Hammurabi, the Myth of Adapa, and just so many more tablets that exist, and seeing through them and understanding that in a lot of cases, the beings or the people being spoken about there, these people, and I do mean people, were connected to other sites all around the world, and even in indigenous cultures with verbal handed down histories like the Aboriginals or the Lakota tribe or the Hopi tribe and so forth all around the world. I began to realize that we ourselves are potentially all sitting and standing on top of Atlantis, and Atlantis was most likely a global civilization that had an origin point. And the reason behind this movie is we're investigating. This is an investigative report, basically. We're gonna go and find out, is this the origin point that we think it is of the building and spreading out around the world of the Atlantean civilization? And I really do believe that, Matthew, you found something special here. And I'm looking forward to digging into this research, going to these ancient sites, and working to make these amazing connections. And you guys and gals, the viewers, can help us make this a reality. You can help us bring this to fruition by supporting. There'll be a link in the caption of this video or this audio podcast. Wherever you find it, click that link and you can actually become a partner with us and help us put this film out. By making a small donation of $100, you can actually be listed as a sponsor on our page on the website itself. By making a donation of, I believe, $600, you can actually have your $500. I'm sorry, you can have your name as a credit in the actual film. So you'll get a film credit, which is incredible. We'll give you a special thanks also when the film is listed on IMDb, which I'm an expert at setting up those IMDb pages and for films and productions because I'm a producer. I'll make sure that those names of those donors go on as an IMDb credit for special thanks as well. So you'll get a special thanks on IMDb. And of course, you'll also get your name listed as a donor on the website. So you'll be part of a film. You'll be part of helping bring something to the world. If you've been sitting around saying, man, I wish I could be a part of these things. I wish I can get my information out to the world. Or I wish I could find a way to help people or change the paradigm. Well, you can help by making a small sacrifice and becoming part of a financial commitment to us to help us get out there and bring this to the world in a very, very high level way. I'm talking about the highest level, not just a YouTube production, but a full-blown movie level production that can really give an impact to people who you may want to show it to that may think there's a lot of conspiracies and this is, too woo-woo. But all of a sudden, you bring them a high-level production like this, they almost have to pay attention.
Right.
They have to watch. And thanks to producers and like Prometheus and others that have produced, shows like Ancient Aliens and many others that have lasted for 19, 20 years, thankfully, those productions we know will catch the mind and hearts of people when they're produced with a high level of quality. And that's what we are aiming to bring here right now. And so it'll be airing in different locations that those specifics haven't been put out yet, but we're going to bring it to the world in a way that hasn't been done before. And so, Matthew, I know that this has become your passion project. And it's really amazing how the universe works because all of a sudden you've got a lot of time to focus on this, which is pretty amazing, it's a blessing. Right. Everything happens in divine time. The fact that all four of us can be on this screen at the same time in 4 different time zones is also a blessing. These kind of alignments only happen only a few times in a person's lifespan. And this alignment of our timelines actually crisscrossing and actually connecting has happened here now. And everyone who's viewing this right now, you have a chance to be a part of something really special. You have a chance to be a part of something that's going to help change the consciousness of humanity on this planet. I have a quick question for Brien, by the way. So, Brien, I know you're an expert on the megaliths, and you've been looking at a lot of these stone structures for literally decades. I mean, your work has been so inspiring. And what types of stones have you seen out there in terms of crystal, granite, diorite? What kind of stones actually exist at some of these ancient sites?
Well, I would say the predominant ones are basalt, which is a volcanic material quite high in iron. There's also andesite, which generally is located around the Andes Mountains, but can be located in other parts of the world. And granite is a very general term for a broad range of different stones like diorite and granodiorite and other stones like that, which you predominantly find in Egypt. So we're basically looking at volcanic stone that has a tendency to be high in quartz content and also in some cases iron as well.
Very hard though, right, Brien? Like not a
And
soft.
always hard. Always 6 to 7 out of 10 on the Mohs scale, where 10 is diamond. So you're talking stone that cannot be cut by anything less than advanced technology.
We're wondering how Bronze Age civilizations could have been credited with doing any of that work, right?
Well, true, exactly. That's the point.
Right. Incredible. And one thing that I found, and I'll be bringing along with me a Geiger counter, just to measure background radiation. We've got to see, what level of radiation is coming out of some of these stones. From my experience visiting some of these megalithic sites, I find that certain stones have more radiation coming out of them than others. And in most cases, there's more radiation than background. So some of these stones are still radioactive, which is pretty interesting. Could they have been able to use or harness some of that radioactivity in some of the construction process? We know that these ancient builders were very, very revolutionary in their thinking and use of tools. They thought way outside, forget the box. They thought outside of the universe in terms of how to utilize tools and stone. And I'm wondering if we can find or figure out if there's any connection between the ambient radiation and some of the ways that they actually were able to manipulate and mold these stones and get them to interlock together, cut them, hoist them up, and everything else. So it's going to be a great investigation when we go out there to start investigating these stones. One thing I found out recently is that, sandstone, basalt, for example, they have a particular, all stones have a particular resonant frequency, but the particular resonant frequency of basalt and sandstone, depending on the magnetic field and also radiation, can be amped up or stepped up to higher kilohertz. And when they get to a specific kilohertz, they can actually transmit frequencies, which can then piggyback data. So you can actually get to a communications level of transmitting information. You get a communications level of transmitting information, I should say, I'm sorry, through stepping up the ambient frequency of some of these stones, which means they may even be able to communicate directly through stone, which is something even mind-blowing. So it's going to be incredible. I'm looking forward to it.
Brien,
it's going to be wild.
What are your thoughts on the types of stone used? Like we talked about different types of igneous and metamorphic rocks, but specifically basalt and andesite. Do you have any thoughts on why they might use that? You mentioned high iron content, maybe like a type of magnetism that's possible at some of these locations. But I just wanted you to just mention that, your thoughts on that, because what are the chances, and this is what's kind of bizarre, is that I like to think of myself as someone who studied well under you, and I'm not aware of any other or very few other sites, if any, besides Tiwanaku Pumapunku that used andesite in an extensive way besides Ionis and the Ararat civilization is Turkey. It's like they were mirroring each other, and there are other comparisons we can make with the lake depths and other things as well with the mountains. But what are your thoughts on seeing so many megalithic sites, as I said, with basalt, andesite? Is there like an energetic function? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, there seems to be a direct relationship between energy or vibration and the type of stone material. So the denser a stone you have, the more resonant or vibrational its characteristics tend to be. So that's why basalt and andesite are very good candidates for setting up even a vibrational field, because some of the structures, ancient megalithic structures in Peru around the city of Cusco, there is an obvious, there used to be an obvious vibrational field that was created after the construction of the site itself. So when you would walk inside the structure, you would literally go into an alternate state of consciousness. That's where our term alter comes from. It's from alternate state, which of course Paul would know all about. So yeah.
I love what Brien just said about the properties of these sites that are constructed of particular stone, and the properties of stone with particular iron content, and how it impacts the human experience in those sites. It just reminded me of what Plato had to say about ancient and previous civilizations when he gets onto the topic of the prior civilization, the Atlantean civilization. He says specifically that they were experts in metallurgy, And I noted earlier that you go into ancient Armenia, and the ancients remember the people who lived there for being the pioneers of iron technology. Now, when we hear pioneers of iron technology or experts in metallurgy, you and I probably think, oh, okay, so they were building things like the Eiffel Tower, were they? So that we will find this ironwork in the civil engineering, but we've made a huge assumption as to what they're using these metals for. And I am coming to the conclusion that what Plato is referencing is not just civil engineering. He's talking about all the properties of these metals with which the ancients worked, and it has to do with health, and it has to do with altered states of consciousness.
Incredible.
Yeah.
I'm glad you bring that up, Paul, because quick question. Now, a lot of people, believe it or not, that are part of a religion, Christianity mostly, they tend to believe that the cross is something that began just a couple thousand years ago. Can you talk a little bit about the origins of the cross being far older than the story of Jesus, aka Yeshua, in the Bible?
Well, I'll give us sort of a bigger context for it, because early in my career as a priest in the Church of England, I worked in a high church, Anglo-Catholic church, full of symbology and full of ceremony. So, I mean, there are types of church where there's no symbolism, there's no art, you're in a plain box. But this was at the other end of the spectrum. Everything was decorated, everything was symbology. And I was taught all the Christian interpretations for the symbology we were using, what the altar meant, why we had an altar stone that had to be ancient, why we had a little cupboard in the corner where we would keep a piece of consecrated bread, and why there'd be a candle flying over it, why, when the bishop turned up, he would be vested in purple, why he would be carrying a stick shaped like a shepherd's crook, why he would wear a skull cap, why we would do processions, why we would wave incense. Everything had a Christian meaning. And yet, as I continued my theological journey, I realized that if somebody from ancient Rome had turned up and watched our procession, he would have said, oh, you got that perfect. And I can see who's in charge here. Somebody from ancient Persia would turn up and say, oh, I can see who's in charge because he's wearing the royal purple chosen by King Cyrus in the 6th century BCE. Somebody from Second Temple Judaism would appear and say, oh, I can see you've got the showbread, just as we have. And bit by bit, I discovered that all the symbology that I was familiar with was far older than Christianity, far older than Anglo-Catholicism, and that these symbols all carry earlier meanings. I talk about this a bit in my book, The Eden Conspiracy, where we pick up a nous at Tel El Farah, which has symbology etched over it. And conventionally, we would go and we would say, oh, we know what these symbols mean in ancient Judaism, and we'll come up with an explanation that this is all about harvest festivals and when to hold them. But symbology travels a long way and often predates what we think its usage might be. If you look at those same symbols and ask what they mean in the root culture, which, as I mentioned before, is the culture of ancient Sumeria, those symbols all carry a different meaning. And we realize we're looking at a star map, identifying where the person referenced on that nous came from and how they got here. So there are all these layers of information. And so you go to the cross and you might say, oh, I know exactly what that means. That is a message about atonement. Well, in my work in the Eden series, I've shown that atonement is not the correct framework for the ancient Christian texts. That's not how they discussed the cross. It did not mean that to them. And now, when we get into ancient Armenia, we discover that the shape of the cross was carrying a meaning which predated Christianity by thousands of years. And I find this really appeals to my sense of humor, because the message of the cross is so central to how we conventionally understand the Christian story. And yet, just like those other symbols I mentioned, it goes much further back and carries information from a far more ancient period in the human story. And that's one of the things I'm really looking to exploring on site when we get to those sites in the new year, and drill down into what were the original associations. What did the cross mean before it got hijacked by a religion of guilt, worship, obedience, and the need for atonement?
Wow, that's going to be so powerful. So powerful. And Matthew, you know, we have a book coming out now. It's finally done. Thank goodness it's done. The Epic of Humanity. By the way, thank both of you, Brien and Paul, for giving a review on that book. We appreciate you so much. The book is finally here. And in this book, Matthew, we kind of really go and try to, give people the true epic, going way back in time and coming forward. And, what you see in there is you see text, ancient tablets. I've got papyrus and cylinder scrolls. We've got, all this information in there, but they all seem to be interlinked. And the deeper you dig, the further back you go. So what we're finding is we just keep kind of moving back and back to get to this origin point, which is what I think you've been able to do. When you started researching all these different tablets and all these different texts, did you ever foresee us going this far back in time?
No, and actually one of the things that's been very interesting coming out of it, studying climatic events in Earth, studying the Younger Dryas, Older Dryas, Oldest Dryas, and then other climatic periods of ice ages and interglacial periods. The conclusion I've had to come to is that studying that flood story that's in the original Sumerian narrative, the Atrahasis version, the original version, and then connecting it to the ancient temples, like we're talking about, with an altar, with the first cross, and these lineages that go back to these Sumerian kings, it's made me realize, wait a minute. So what we're talking about here is that civilization, as we're told in school, the doctrine is only 6,000 years old when we emerged out of being hunter-gatherers and started something different, right? But wait a minute, though, that there's a problem now, even in the sense of me connecting this to the Younger Dryas, because not only is that 12,000 years old, and not only are you doubling that, but I don't even believe that it's from that event either. Because what we're told, and what Paul is shaking his head, he knows over there, is that in Plato's the Timaeus and Critias, we know that Solon was told by the temple priests of Sais, he was told to them by Sancius, said that there have been many, many destructions of ancient Greece and other civilizations. You Greeks only remember one deluge, but there have been many of water and fire. And the more we look back, the more we think, well, how many versions of civilizations have come and risen and then been subsequently destroyed? And what I've come to is studying Ionis, the andesite stone built there, comparing it across the world to Tiwanaku and Pumapunku, knowing where that time period exists, and knowing that it, first of all, can't be younger than 12,000 years old because of the stonework, tools available, time periods, different things like that. And then saying, well, wait a minute, though. If Ionis is from an event after a great catastrophe and then it was built, it can't be right after the Younger Dryas, because we don't see any emergence of an incredible civilizations after that. If anything, what we see after 12,000 years ago around the world is a more primitive reset, like Graham Hancock says, like species of amnesia, which means that it had to be another iteration of the flood, a complete other cycle. And when I started to dial it in and to think, wait a minute, so we have the Sumerian king list, the Uruk list of kings and sages, the ancient Egyptian kings list that come out, the Turin king list. We start to add those ages up. We add up the ages that are in Christianity with Enoch. We add up all of this. And what it tells us is that Ionis, in the state that it's in, being somewhat preserved, may be the oldest temple on earth, which is why that first cross is there. And I believe that it's well over 20,000 years. Well over. And I want to actually give you the number. We look at the ages of all this. I believe that Ionis, and this is going to be difficult for some to accept, but I had to go back and look at Zep-Tepi periods of Egypt and different periods of alignment with star systems and different climatic periods. And what I've come up with is that I believe that Ionis is potentially 20, 30, could even be 50,000 years old, which would align with these Atlantean narratives from Edgar Cayce and others of this lost chapter in history when it seems to have been like a golden age where information was lowered about ascension and higher consciousness, but also building giant temples and pyramids. And it traveled around the world and they built all these things. But where did it come from? Where did it start? Where did those sages come from? Where did that knowledge come from? That's what's so exciting about this, and how I think that Ionis and Kef Temple and Kavis and the whole lost Ararat civilization and the connections to Tiwanaku and Pumapunku is going to be profound enough. And this is a loaded statement, but with experts like Brien, Billy, and Paul, with the amount of money we're going to raise and to have something so high budget to be seen by millions around the world, being followed by something like Ancient Apocalypse, thank you, Graham Hancock on Netflix, this is now a progression to change this narrative so that foundation of sand, like he says, finally collapses. And the entire narrative and doctrine changes. And this film and discoveries that we're going to try to connect here has that potential to do that. And that's why it's so powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow.
I think the flood is a great entry point for a lot of people into these questions and the questions of previous civilizations. And I know when the Younger Dryas cold event really began entering into mainstream conversation, a lot of people got very excited. And so a lot of religious believers said, oh, this is great. This is an affirmation of our flood story, because there was flooding at the tail end of the Younger Dryas. It must be that's being remembered. And then students of Plato said, oh, this is really exciting because the tail end of the Younger Dryas coincides with the timeline that Plato had for the loss of Atlantis. Except that's not the only flooding in the planet's story. There would have been massive flooding at the beginning of the Younger Dryas cold period, the events that triggered it. And in my research, which, as I say, is in ancient texts, indigenous narratives, I find evidence for multiple flood experiences. So you go to Genesis, there's a flood in Genesis 1. There are 2 floods in Genesis 6, stories that have been fused together. There's another planetary reset in Genesis 11. And in fact, I think by the time you get to Genesis 11, you've read about 5 planetary resets. Plato argued that planetary resets were actually a regular occurrence on this planet. And he said every 5,000 years or so, something will happen, something to do with objects in space impacting the conditions on planet Earth that will mean there's going to have to be a reboot of some kind. So there are breadcrumbs that lead people into this territory, and we might start off with what seems a simple picture or a recent picture, but the more you probe, the more you realize this is an ancient story of multiple confusions on our timeline, multiple impacts on our planet. And I'm so excited to be probing this with you guys in this project, because I think there is so much more information that has been carried in our texts, but also archaeologically when we start looking at fire damage and water damage around the planet. And I think getting further down that rabbit hole is going to be exciting, and is going to change our view of the history, not only of humanity, but of the planet.
No, for sure. And I think that Brian's going to have a lot to offer to add to that, because we're talking about catastrophes, like you say, happening in these cycles, but these megalithic sites still withstanding till this current day, the majority of them. So Brian, in your research, have you seen any evidence of the construction techniques that will allow these megalithic structures to withstand earthquakes and other types of geological disasters?
Oh, definitely. But what we also see is actually relates to what Paul was just talking about, and that's fire damage. So we see vitrification, which is turning stone into glass. And in a lot of locations, at Karnak in Egypt, at different sites around Lake Titicaca, we see obvious signs that usually from the east, there was a heat source that came, possibly plasma ejection from the sun, that struck these sites and partially damaged them way, way, way in the distant past. So yeah, there's definitely evidence of that. All of the megalithic structures tend to be earthquake proof, but I think that's simply a side product. I think, again, the original function was that these were vibratory structures of some kind, being the energy of the earth channeling itself into the structure and setting up an alternate field of energy inside each one of these structures.
Yeah, incredible. Yeah, this is going to guide us, towards a whole new path. Matthew, what are the implications for, us on this planet based on this new information coming out? How is it going to affect us?
It's difficult to keep building it up in a way where people might be like, that can't be that big. But honestly, it is. Because like if Paul remembers, when I pulled him into that Fifth Kind show, and I was like, Paul, look at this box relief, this giant stone basalt box from Kef Temple, right? Check it out. And I remember him like staring at it, and he was kind of quiet for a little while. And we ended up talking about it for like almost an hour, I think. Because on that box, which came from one of the adjacent sites, one of the ancient temples that I think aligns with potentially like a rising of the sun, and then the other temple represents a setting of the sun. I believe that's what their functions were aligned to, as I've been studying the sites. But the box itself from Kef seems to be some kind of like a teaching cipher for understanding these, not almost like doctrines, but doctrines in a way from a pure standpoint. So a doctrine is just like a set of rules, a set of thoughts and processes here. But this specific set that they seem to have carved precisely into this gigantic basalt box seems to be like a teaching that was passed around the world, and it has these grooves underneath it that are very bizarre, like it was carried just like the Ark of the Covenant. And it's quite large. It's multiple feet by multiple feet long. It's quite a large box. But on the box has these teachings. And these teachings seem to be closely associated with the same types of teachings we see at Ionis, but as like more of like a connection with understanding, a wider understanding of what was passed at Ionis. And what I mean by it is that we get these symbols that are then shown all around the world. And Brien sees them all over Peru and Bolivia. And what it is, and this is what you start to wrap your head around and get wild here, is imagine that these ancient civilizations were embodying the knowledge of something into structures that literally represented aspects of teaching and totalities, but also connecting to the stars and creating this unison between heaven and earth. And in the Kef boxes, they have this symbol that is a ziggurat step pyramid. Has exactly 3 levels, okay? There are 3 of them, and each of them has a door in the center, okay? The central ziggurat doorway is precisely above this god Haldi. Above on his head, he's got the fleur-de-lis plumed symbol on his head, fitting into the very center doorway that then above it has the fleur-de-lis flowering with the 2 griffins on either edge protecting it. Paul knew exactly what he was seeing when he saw that. He was like, this is an ancient spiritual religious teaching. It's literally not only teaching us about the doorways of energy for how to ascend to reach literally the highest state of energy we can, the highest state of consciousness. That's what those doorways represent. So the 3 represented what became in Christianity the triptych, or the Trinity, the Holy Trinity. And it represents these 3 aspects of us. And that if we learn to balance these harmonies of the left and the right side of us, this masculine and feminine energy, these different concepts of the totalities of what exists as the body, the soul, and the mind, if we can balance them, it showed this flowering of what we become like gods. And it was trying to teach us the path to divinity. And along with those symbols, they have the ziggurat stepped doorway pyramid with the inverted version built right in, with also arrows showing up, down, up, down, up, down, showing you the hermetic law constants that came out of Hermes, out of the Greek Hermes, which literally, I believe Greece came out of this civilization. Because the same griffin symbol, the same symbols we see embodied into the ancient Greek civilization, which, by the way, Plato talks about, with Solon talks about, that was a civilization that existed during the time of Atlantis. We're seeing what may be the origins of the ascension teachings and the origins of religion before it took a very different turn later on. Now, not only that, but Haldi is holding a chalice in his hand while he's passing the seeds of knowledge, or seeds of the tree of life, which is shown right next to it, with right above it this T-shaped pillar over and over again above the tree of life, showing this balance of all things. And we see those symbols spreading all around the world from that point. So if we were to study the Kef box relief, which we are, that's why we're going to that museum in Ankara, and we're connecting it to Ionis and all the symbols, and then we can figure out what they mean based on the associated understandings. Brien knows that ziggurat temple symbol, if you combine the above symbol with the inverted version, becomes the Chicana of South America. It is the exact same symbol, but they added more levels than the original 3. All the symbols that we find at Tiwanaku and Pumapunku are the same versions, but slightly altered with their own like take on it. And that's what is just very profound, because so many people think, well, we don't really know what these mean. We're kind of think this means this, or we have an idea that the indigenous groups believe this. But what if you found the cipher and origin point of all of it? And then all the symbols around it have the same depictions that we can put like a key in a lock and turn it and open something. But what's inside that may be this key to us finally coming together to realize the origin point of who we truly are and what we could become.
Absolutely. So powerful and well said. Paul, what are your feelings on this, how this is going to affect us and change the world, these discoveries that we're going to bring forward?
I am so looking forward to the 4 of us sitting down in front of that basalt box.
Me too.
Because just to echo everything that Matt just said, when Matt introduced me to it, I was just rooted to the spot, because I realized what we're looking at. It's like it's like a time capsule. It's like a message from beyond, and the symbology on it, it's the story of everything. It's the story of who we are. It's a story of a moment in history. It's a story about our potential. Everything is wrapped up in that box. And I agree with Matthew that the heart of every ascension tradition is there on that box. The effect, for me, the effect is to have so much more respect for antiquity and for the information that's been carried through the ages from the earliest of times, because ascension traditions are fascinating. They are often not the main syllabus of a religion or a spiritual tradition. They're certainly not the main syllabus at school. And the story of human migrations, human conquests, the stories of empire, it's difficult to tell those stories without having at the same time to talk about the suppression of ascension traditions, the suppression of shamanic knowledge, the suppression of indigenous story. And yet somehow these ascension teachings survive, and they keep reemerging. And for me, as a student of religious thought, it's fascinating that I can go anywhere on the planet, to any culture, to any period in time, and there will be an aspect of previous, ancient, lost knowledge resurfacing via this indigenous priesthood, via this secret society, embedded in this symbology at this site. And to get to the root of all that, the root of the information that will never go away, that is always protected, that always reemerges, is going to be so exciting. I remember, I think it was J.B. Phillips talked about the experience of retranslating the New Testament, and he said it was like rewiring a house with the power still turned on. And I think that's the experience we're going to have as we go to the root of all this information, the
Yeah.
information that lies at the heart of every ascension tradition. And I think because it's at the heart, because it predates everything we've been taught, it has the potential to unify people in a powerful way, to release people from narratives that have dominated for a long time, that have kept people bound, controlled, managed, and not exploring, and inspire a whole new era of hunger, appetite, exploration. It is really the information and energy of Renaissance. And
Yeah.
that's my grand hope for what's happening right now and the information we will find at these sites. That's the energy we will be tapping together.
Oh yeah, I can't wait. And Brien, what are your thoughts on how this will affect civilization on this planet as well?
Well, I think to find, what you might call the source would be absolutely profound. It does make sense that it would be located in an area such as Armenia and Turkey, because so many ancient traditions go back that far. I'm eager to do a comparison of the symbolism between what is located around that part of the world and what we find in Tiwanaku and Pumapunku. I've seen a few photographs that show from Matthew that show very striking similarities. So yeah, to see if there's an even stronger link would be really interesting. And yeah, just to go to a site that is relatively similar to what I've seen in different parts of the world, but possibly even older, would be absolutely profound.
And just from my perspective, my point of view, I remember a few years ago, Matthew, actually the day that we talked about doing the Epic of Humanity book, which is finally out now.
Three and a half years ago or something?
3.5 years ago, yeah, I went
Yeah.
up to Maine and hung out with you. We went to a private island. We did a podcast on the myth of Adapa. What I see coming out of this is the knowledge that's encoded into that tablet, not just by reading it and saying, oh, this is what they said, but actually feeling it and experiencing the fact that we are powerful beings,
Yeah.
that we are supposed to seek the light, that the light is already in us and the knowledge is already in us. We just haven't tapped into it fully yet, and to be able to help humanity reach its full potential. And so I'm really excited about this opportunity. I'm excited to be part of this team. And this to me, this is an all-star cast. I'm just really, appreciative to even be a part of this and to be able to go and see these sites. As you know, I love, my passion is traveling. My passion is visiting these sites and doing the research in person. I really, truly believe that's the only real way to get the right perspective and perception of some of these locations, which is why I have so much respect for Brien Foerster, because like you said earlier, Matthew, got to give this man credit. He inspired me to go out even further and further and continue to look and go out there, because every time you turn around, this guy's at another site and it's like, man, this guy's getting to the knowledge. He's getting his hands dirty, and that's what it takes. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to get our hands dirty. We're going to bump heads. We're going to come up with different hypotheses and ideas. We're going to, I remember we did a series before, you and I and a few other people, and it was, we bumped heads a little bit. We got to figure out, like, how does this congeal? How does it all come together? But it's going to be so exciting for not only us, but also the people watching, to see us begin to lay down real research and see what it really takes. That it's not just, you just sit in front of a camera and come up with all these crazy hypotheses, that you actually really got to go do some real work, and you have to put real knowledge and receipts. I call it receipts behind what you're speaking, to come up with these, enough circumstantial evidence that's going to prove a point to the people.
Yeah.
So I think it's going to take everyone on this journey, and it's going to be amazing. And everyone, again, listening right now, whether you're watching or listening, there's a link in this podcast. There's a link in the caption of this video. You can become a part of this journey with us. You can come on this journey with us. You can be a part of this and live through this vicariously through us. You can actually be a part by making a sacrifice, making a donation of $100. We'll list you as a sponsor on the website. And if you make a donation of $500, you actually get a chance to get your name in the credits. You can sponsor even more than that. We'd like for you to be a part of helping us make this a reality. And we want to produce it at the very highest level that we possibly can. We don't want this to be a Zoom documentary. Nothing wrong with that, but that's not what this is. This is going to be on the same level of a Netflix, Amazon Prime Video, Forbidden Knowledge TV, all that level. That's what we're talking about. Producing a Hulu level, whatever you want to call it, the level that could be released even in the box office if we wanted to. That's the level of production that we're shooting for. That's what we're going to achieve because we're masters of our own destiny. We truly believe that. And you can be a part of that by clicking that link and becoming a supporter today. Everyone, I wish we could talk for 10,000 more hours, but we can't. But I think that the people who listen to this got a lot out of it. They got to learn a little bit about each one of us and hear some of our perspective and objectives on this new experience, this new incredible journey we're all going to go on together. And does anybody have any final words?
People will be sharing a process with us. This is not going to be like a dry documentary. This is how it is. Here is an alternative timeline. There are going to be four heads, four researchers bumping up against each other, exploring together, comparing ideas together. Of course, four individuals never agree 100% on everything. So because of that, we're going to be teasing out the implications of what we're seeing, challenging each other on our interpretations. And I think that's going to be a whole lot more fun than some expert standing behind a lectern saying, this is how it is, everybody. And that is going to make it a really dynamic experience. People will be sharing our discoveries in real time, as it were, as they see us on these sites and having these conversations.
Absolutely. Brien, anything you want to say before we get out of here, Brien?
No, I just want to thank the three of you for coming together like this. I think this could be somewhat similar to the Beatles, like four aspects coming together to create a whole: body, mind, heart, spirit.
I like
so,
beautiful.
I look forward to future discussions with you guys about this, and I'm very excited to be part of this. So thank you all for allowing me to be a member.
A great adventure, gentlemen. All right, a great adventure to change history.
Absolutely. So you guys heard it, guys and gals. Click the link, become a part of this journey with us. Make sure you sponsor. A lot of people, like I said before, always say, I wish I could be a part of something like this. I wish I can help bring more information and knowledge to the world. Well, this is your opportunity to feel like you're part of this, to actually be able to help sponsor this project so we can produce it at the highest level. Everyone, thanks for joining us tonight or today or wherever you are in the world. And we'll be back soon with more information about the Lost Ararat Project or whatever the story or the title is going to be eventually. But you can help support us by clicking that link today.